I don't feel safe sitting next to him, Olivia hissed, unaware that cameras were already live-streaming her downfall to millions. She expected the captain to move the passenger. Instead, he shut down the entire flight. Olivia was about to learn that the man she called suspicious held the power to delete her entire life with one signature. Captain Garret stood up when it was easy to look away, and we're building a community that does the same. If you're tired of seeing profiling win, subscribe now to help us keep telling the stories that matter. Tell me which city you're watching from. I'm reading every comment today. You are not alone. The boarding process for Flight 714 was nearly finished when the air in the business class cabin shifted. Jeffery Thomas was already settled into 4B, his phone in his hand and his mind on the meetings he had scheduled in San Diego. He didn't look up when he heard the clicking of heels on the carpeted floor, but he felt the person stop abruptly right at his row. "There must be a mistake," a woman's voice said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for correction. Jeffery looked up to see Olivia Phillips standing in the aisle. She was holding a boarding pass in one hand and a designer bag in the other, her eyes fixed on him with a look of intense physical discomfort. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his clothes, the simple gray polo and the khakis he wore for travel. "Excuse me?" Jeffery asked, lowering his phone. Olivia didn't answer him. She turned her back to him and waved down a flight attendant who was helping a passenger a few rows back. "Miss, over here." Immediately, the attendant, a young woman named Elena, hurried over. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" "No, it is certainly not okay," Olivia said, her voice rising in volume, cutting to the low hum of the cabin. "I booked a seat in business class for the security and the environment. I didn't pay thousands of dollars to be placed next to this." She gestured vaguely at Jeffery, as if he were an inanimate object. Jeffery felt the blood rush to his face. "I'm sorry, is there a problem with my seat?" Olivia finally looked at him, her eyes cold. "The problem is that you don't belong here. I know your type. You probably slipped past the gate agents or used some points loophole. But I don't feel safe sitting next to someone who looks like you. You look suspicious, and frankly, I find your presence in this cabin threatening." The cabin went silent. Across the aisle, a teenager pulled out a phone and started recording. 2 seats back, an older man leaned out into the aisle to see what was happening. "Ma'am," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly but remaining professional. "Mr. Thomas is a confirmed passenger in this seat. If you'll just take your place, we can get started with the safety briefing." "I will not take my place," Olivia snapped. "Do you realize who I am? I am a senior executive. I deal with risk management for a living, and my intuition tells me this man is a risk. Look at him. He's not even dressed for business class. He's sitting there, lurking, waiting for the lights to go down. I want him moved to the back of the plane where he belongs." Jeffery took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of every camera in the cabin turning toward him. He knew that if he raised his voice, he would become the aggressive one in the narrative. "I have my boarding pass right here," he said quietly, holding it up. "I'm just trying to go home." "Don't speak to me," Olivia said, recoiling as if he had tried to touch her. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You're making me uncomfortable, and as a paying customer, I have the right to demand a seat change. Move him to coach. There's plenty of room back there with the rest of his people." "Ma'am, that is enough," Elena said, her face turning red. "You are making a scene and using language that is not permitted on this aircraft." "I'm making a scene?" Olivia laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "I'm trying to ensure the safety of this flight. He could have anything in those pockets. He hasn't even opened his carry-on. Why is he just sitting there? It's classic profiling for a reason, because it works. Now, either he goes, or I start calling the corporate office of this airline from the tarmac." Jeffery looked around. Most of the passengers were staring at Olivia with a mix of shock and disgust, but no one was saying anything yet. The tension was a physical weight in the air. He felt a wave of humiliation wash over him, but underneath it, a steadying sense of resolve. He wasn't going to move, and he wasn't going to disappear. "I'm not moving," Jeffery said firmly. Olivia turned to cabin, her voice reaching a screech. "Does anyone else see this? Are we really going to let this happen? We are sitting ducks. This man is a threat, and this airline is complicit. She didn't notice that the cockpit door had just swung open. Captain Fisher Garret stepped out, his tall frame filling the narrow walkway. He didn't say a word at first. He just watched as Olivia pointed a shaking finger at Jeffrey's chest, her face contorted with a prejudice she didn't even care to hide anymore. Captain Garret didn't raise his voice, but the sudden stillness of his presence caused Olivia to freeze mid-sentence. He stood in the narrow gap of the aisle, his hands resting naturally at his sides, eyes scanning the row. He looked at the flight attendant's distressed face, then at Jeffrey, who remained seated with a calm but firm expression, and finally at Olivia, whose finger was still pointed aggressively towards seat 4B. "What seems to be the trouble here?" the captain asked. Olivia straightened her blazer, her face shifting from rage to a sharp, performative desperation. "Captain, thank goodness. I was just explaining to your staff that I have a serious safety concern. This man," she said, gesturing to Jeffrey again, "is making me extremely uncomfortable. I've requested a seat change, but I'm being told the flight is full. As a frequent flyer with this airline, I expect my safety to be prioritized over his convenience." Captain Garret looked at Jeffrey. "Sir, has there been any physical altercation or verbal threat made?" "None," Jeffrey said clearly. "I haven't even unbuckled my seatbelt since I sat down." The captain turned back to Olivia. "Ma'am, unless there's a specific safety violation or behavioral issue I need be aware of, I cannot move a passenger from their assigned seat. The issue is that I don't trust them." Olivia's voice spiked again, drawing the attention of every passenger within 6 rows. "I have a right to feel secure in the seat I paid for. He doesn't look like he belongs in this cabin, and his presence is a distraction. If you won't move him, then move me to another section, or better yet, do your job and remove the person causing discomfort." Captain Garret stepped a few inches closer, closing the distance in the aisle. His expression went from inquisitive to strictly professional. "I want to be very clear with you, ma'am. My job is to ensure the safety and dignity of every person on this aircraft. Looking suspicious is not a valid reason to harass a fellow passenger. You are currently the only one disrupting the peace of this cabin." Olivia let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Are you joking? I am a senior executive at Westbridge Group. I know how security works. If I say I feel threatened, you're obligated to act. If you don't, I will make sure the airline hears about your incompetence before we even land." The captain didn't blink. He reached for the radio on his shoulder, then looked Olivia directly in the eye. "I'm going to give you exactly one choice, and I need your answer right now. You can sit down in your assigned seat, stow your bag, and remain silent for the duration of the flight to San Diego. Or I can call airport security to the gate right now and have you escorted off this plane for interfering with the flight crew's duties." The cabin went deathly quiet. Olivia's mouth hung open for a second, her face turning a deep, blotchy red. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered. "I have a board meeting to attend. You're threatening me for wanting to be safe." "I'm not threatening you, ma'am," Garret replied, his voice flat and final. "I am informing you of the rules of this aircraft. You are delaying the departure of 200 other people because of a personal bias. Either sit down and fly, or stand up and leave. Which is it?" Olivia looked around, realizing for the first time that no one was nodding in agreement with her. The phones were still pointed her way, recording every word of her hesitation. She gripped the handle of her bag, so hard her knuckles turned white, her pride clashing with the reality that she was seconds away from losing her audience. Olivia didn't move. She stood frozen in the aisle, her face a mask of disbelief as she stared at Captain Garret. She clearly expected him to blink, to apologize, or to offer her a voucher to settle her down. But the captain simply keyed his radio and spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Security to 4B. The cabin remained deathly silent for a moment, the only sound being the low hum of the air conditioning. Then Olivia's shock curdled into a fresh wave of indignity. "You are making the mistake of your career," she hissed. She looked at Jeffrey, who was still sitting quietly, then back at the captain. "I am not leaving this plane. I have a seat. I have a ticket. You have no grounds to touch me. I have the authority to remove any passenger who is a disruption to the safety and order of this flight," Garret replied. He didn't look angry. He looked bored, as if he were dealing with a minor mechanical delay rather than a high-powered executive. 2 airport police officers appeared at the boarding door less than 3 minutes later. They walked down the narrow aisle with a heavy, rhythmic gait that signaled the end of the debate. The lead officer looked at the captain, who nodded toward Olivia. "Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and come with us," the officer said. "I will do no such thing." Olivia shouted, her voice cracking. "This man is the problem. Why aren't you looking at him? He's the one who doesn't belong here." When the officer reached for her arm to guide her toward the exit, Olivia made her final, fatal mistake. She jerked her arm away and swung her designer bag, striking the officer's shoulder. It wasn't a hard hit, but it changed the nature of the encounter instantly. In a blur of motion, the officers moved in. Olivia was spun around, her face pressed briefly against the headrest of an empty seat, and the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the cabin. "You're hurting me. This is assault," Olivia screamed, her voice echoing into the economy cabin behind them. As the officers began to lead her down the aisle, the silence in the plane finally broke. It started with a single person clapping, the teenager who had been filming from the start. And within seconds, a wave of applause and cheers swept through the entire aircraft. People stood up to watch her go, their faces filled with a mix of relief and satisfaction. Olivia looked around, her eyes wide with sudden, terrifying realization. She wasn't the victim here, and no one in this room was on her side. She saw dozens of glowing smartphone screens pointed at her, capturing her disheveled hair, her tear-streaked face, and the steel cuffs around her wrists. "I'll sue all of you," she shrieked as they pulled her through the galley and onto the jet bridge. "Every single one of you." The door to the aircraft hissed shut, cutting off her voice. The silence that followed was different. It was peaceful. Captain Garret looked at Jeffery, who was exhaling a long, shaky breath. "You okay, sir?" the captain asked. "I am now," Jeffery said, nodding slowly. "Thank you, Captain." "Don't thank me. I just like my flights to run on time and with a little bit of decency," Garret said. He turned to the rest of the cabin. "Folks, we'll be pushing back in about 5 minutes. Thank you for your patience." As the captain headed back to the cockpit, the cabin was filled with a frantic tapping of thumbs on glass. Before the tug even engaged to pull the plane away from the gate, the first video hit the internet. It was captioned, "Executive thinks she owns a plane, leaves in handcuffs instead." By the time the wheels left the tarmac, the footage had already been shared 10,000 times. Olivia Phillips was famous, but not for the career she had spent 20 years building. She was famous for the person she had revealed herself to be in Seat 4B. The moment Flight 714 touched the runway in San Diego, the cabin erupted in the synchronized chiming of 100 cell phones regaining signal. Jeffrey Thomas reached for his phone, expecting a few missed texts from his family. Instead, his screen was a blurred wall of notifications. His social media apps were frozen, struggling to load the sheer volume of tags and messages. He looked around and saw other passengers staring at him, then back at their screens, then at him again with a new kind of intensity. By the time the plane reached the gate, the video of Olivia Phillips being led away in handcuffs had already bypassed 20 million views. It hadn't just gone viral. It had become a cultural flashpoint. The top trending hashtag worldwide was hashtag Westbridge Group, and it wasn't for their market strategy. People had already used the high-resolution footage to identify Olivia, her job title, and her professional history. By the second hour of the flight, internet sleuths had dug up her LinkedIn profile, her corporate headshots, and her previous interviews where she spoke about inclusive leadership. The irony was not lost on the public. Under every post of the video, the comment sections were moving so fast they were unreadable. The footage of her hitting the officer's shoulder was being replayed in slow motion on news tickers across every major network. At the headquarters of Westbridge Group in Chicago, the PR department was in a state of total collapse. The company's main switchboard was jammed with thousands of callers demanding Olivia's immediate termination. Their social media pages were flooded with screenshots of the video, and their latest post, a graphic celebrating Diversity Month, had been buried under 250,000 angry comments. The CEO of the firm, Robert Haley, was pulled out of a lunch meeting to view the footage. He didn't even watch the whole thing. He saw Olivia's finger pointed at Jeffrey, heard the suspicious comment, and watched the handcuffs click shut. He knew the math. The firm's stock was already beginning to dip as institutional investors saw the brand safety nightmare unfolding in real time. Clients were already emailing, threatening to pull their accounts if the firm didn't distance itself from Olivia by the end of business day. Back at the airport, Jeffrey walked through the terminal, trying to keep his head down. He felt a hand on his shoulder and flinched, only to see a middle-aged woman holding out a bottle of water. "I saw the video while we were in the air," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that. You handled it better than most people would." Jeffrey thanked her and kept moving, but he could see himself on the television screens in the airport bars. There was his face, sitting in seat 4B, while Olivia screamed in the foreground. He felt a strange sense of displacement. He had walked onto a plane as a private citizen and walked off as a symbol in a holding cell at the airport precinct. Olivia was finally allowed her one phone call. She didn't call a lawyer. She called the office. She expected her assistant to be frantic, or for Robert to be ready with a high-priced legal team to scrub the internet. "Put Robert on," she told the receptionist, her voice still trembling with remnants of her earlier rage. "I'm sorry, Miss Phillips," the voice on the other end said. It was cold, formal, and lacked the usual deference. "I've been instructed to inform you that your corporate credentials have been deactivated. A formal statement is being released to the press in 10 minutes. Your personal items will be couriered to your home address. Do not contact this office again." The line went dead. Olivia stared at the receiver, the reality of the digital age finally crashing down on her. The world hadn't waited for her side of the story. It had seen her, judged her, and moved on, all before a flight had even landed. Olivia was out of the precinct by noon the next day, her eyes bloodshot and her silk blazer wrinkled beyond repair. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the offices of a high-end crisis management firm tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She sat across from a man named Elias Thorne, a fixer known for burying scandals for the city's elite. "It was a setup," Olivia said, her voice cracking as she slammed her phone onto his desk. The video was still playing on a loop in the background on a wall-mounted news feed. "That man, Jeffery Thomas. He was waiting for me. He knew exactly what he was doing. He stayed quiet to make me look like the aggressor. And that pilot? He's clearly looking for a payout from a civil rights lawsuit. They worked together to ruin me." Elias didn't look at the phone. He looked at the numbers. "The video has 40 million views, Olivia. You hit a police officer. That's not a setup. That's a felony. And your company already issued a statement saying your views don't reflect their values. You're radioactive." "I don't care what it costs," Olivia snapped. "I want a countersuit. I want to sue the airline for emotional distress and breach of contract. I want to sue Jeffery Thomas for defamation. He's been doing interviews, acting like a martyr. We need to find the dirt on him. Everyone has dirt. Find out who he is, where he works, and what he's hiding." We flipped the narrative. I'm the victim of a coordinated digital hit job. Elias sighed and started typing. Within hours, a press release was drafted claiming Olivia had been suffering from a documented medical episode exacerbated by flight anxiety and provocative behavior from the other passenger. She filed a formal intent to sue against the airline, demanding $30 million and the immediate termination of Captain Garret, while Olivia sat in her darkened living room, refreshing news feeds and watching her legal team go on the offensive. Elias's researchers began digging into Jeffery Thomas. They looked for unpaid taxes, messy divorces, or a criminal record. Anything they could leak to the press to muddy his image. But the deeper they dug, the quieter Elias became. He wasn't finding a disgruntled passenger or a professional victim. He was finding a paper trail that led to several offshore accounts and a series of quiet, massive donations to urban development funds. "Olivia," Elias called her 2 days later. "We have a problem with the retaliation strategy." "Did you find his record?" she asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope. "Is he a fraud?" "It's the opposite," Elias said, his voice flat. "Jeffery Thomas doesn't have a record because he doesn't exist in the way you think he does. He isn't a random traveler. I just trace his family trust. He's a silent majority shareholder of the investment group that owns 40% of Westbridge Group. He isn't just a passenger, Olivia. He's essentially your former boss's boss. The silence on Olivia's end was long and heavy. The suspicious man she had tried to throw off a plane didn't just belong in business class. He owned the building she had worked in for 20 years. Her attempt to sue him wasn't just a legal mistake. It was professional suicide. The digital storm surrounding Olivia Phillips had reached a fever pitch, but inside the secure offices of the Thomas Family Trust, the atmosphere was clinical and quiet. Jeffrey sat across from his lead counsel, Arthur Vance, watching a spreadsheet that detailed the massive reach of his family's quiet legacy. For decades, the Thomas name had been scrubbed from public view, buried under layers of holding companies and private trusts. They didn't want the spotlight. They wanted the influence. "She's doubling down, Jeffrey," Arthur said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Her PR team is pushing a narrative that you were a plant. A professional agitator sent to bait a high-profile executive into a viral moment. She's even suggested that the airline wasn't on it to avoid a different lawsuit." Jeffrey looked at the screen. Olivia had posted a video from her home, looking weary and rehearsed, claiming she was a victim of modern-day digital lynching. She was calling for a boycott of the airline and had officially served papers to Captain Garret for harassment. "She still doesn't get it," Jeffrey said. "She thinks this is a game of who can shout the loudest on the news. She thinks she's untouchable because of her position at Westbridge Group," Arthur replied. "What she hasn't realized, and what we've kept hidden for 30 years, is that Westbridge Group isn't a family-owned firm. When the founders went through that liquidity crisis in the 90s, your father didn't just bail them out. He bought the foundation." Arthur opened a leather-bound folder containing the original articles of incorporation. Under the section for controlling interest, the name wasn't Phillips. It was a subsidiary of the Thomas Trust. "Technically," Arthur continued, "Olivia has been an employee of yours since the day she was hired. Her salary, her bonuses, and that designer bag she used to hit the police officer, all of it was paid for by the dividends generated by your family's capital." Jeffrey leaned back. He had never used this power before. He had been content to live on his own terms, working as a consultant and traveling without fanfare. But Olivia's attempt to destroy Captain Garret, a man who had risked his career just to be a decent human being, had changed things. "If we reveal this now, what happens?" Jeffrey asked. "The board of directors at Westbridge Group has no idea," Arthur said. "They report to a management firm that reports to us. If you walk into that building, you aren't just a witness or a victim. You are the owner. You can dissolve her contract, void her stock options, and end her legal funding with a single signature. She's using your own money to sue you." Jeffrey stood up and looked out at the city skyline. He thought about the cold, dismissive look in Olivia's eyes when she told him he didn't belong in business class. She had built her entire identity on a hierarchy that she didn't realize he sat at the top of. "Prepare the disclosure documents," Jeffrey said, "and call the airline. Tell them Captain Garret has the full backing of the majority shareholder of their largest corporate client. We aren't going to hide anymore." The secret was out. The man in the gray polo wasn't just a passenger. He was a foundation of the very world Olivia Phillips thought she ruled. It was time for a final meeting in a boardroom she thought was hers. The morning of the emergency board meeting, the atmosphere inside the executive wing of Westbridge Group was frantic. The directors had spent the last 48 hours watching the company's valuation tank, and they were looking for a scapegoat. Olivia Phillips sat at the far end of the long table, her eyes hollow, still clutching the belief that her legal team could spin the airline incident as a misunderstanding. She had been barred from her office, but as a senior partner, she had demanded to be present for the vote on her future. "The PR damage is irreversible," Robert Haley, the CEO, said as he paced the room. "The client are leaving. We need to issue a final termination and hope the news cycle moves on." "You can't fire me for a viral video that was edited to make me look bad," Olivia countered, her voice thin but sharp. "I've given this firm 20 years. I have rights. I have a contract." The heavy double doors at the front of the room swung open. The board members turned, expecting a lawyer or a late director. Instead, Jeffrey Thomas walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was dressed in the same simple gray polo and khakis he had worn on the flight. Behind him was a man in a dark suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. The room went silent. Olivia's face drained of color as she gripped the edge of the table. What is he doing here? This is a private board meeting. Robert, call security immediately. Robert didn't move. He was looking at the man behind Jeffrey, Arthur Vance, the most powerful corporate attorney in the city. Jeffrey didn't wait for an invitation. He walked to the head of the table, the position reserved for the chairman. He didn't look at Olivia with anger. He looked at her with a calm, unsettling indifference. I think there's been a misunderstanding about who owns the security in this building, Jeffrey said. His voice was quiet, the same tone he had used in seat 4B. Arthur Vance stepped forward and laid a single sheet of paper in front of Robert. As of 8 o'clock this morning, the Thomas Family Trust has exercised its option to consolidate its holdings. They have acquired the remaining shares from the outgoing chairman and now hold a 51% controlling interest in Westbridge Group. Jeffrey pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. The directors, who had been ready to argue, suddenly found reasons to look at their laps. I've spent a lot of years staying out of the way, Jeffrey said, looking around the room. I prefer to let the experts run the day-to-day. I like being just another face on a plane. But when someone tells me I don't belong in a room, a special room I paid for, I feel the need to clarify things. He turned his gaze to Olivia. She was shaking, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. The suspicious man she had tried to have arrested was now the only person who could save her career, and everyone in the room knew he wasn't going to do it. Olivia, Jeffrey said, you mentioned on the flight that you deal with risk management. You were right about one thing. There was a major risk in that cabin. It was you. You're a liability to the culture of this firm and a danger to its reputation. Jeffrey, please, Olivia stammered, her voice finally breaking. I was stressed. I didn't know who you were. That's the point, Jeffrey replied. You should have to know who someone is to treat them with basic human decency. You only respect power, but today, you've run out of it. He looked at Robert. The vote is canceled. I'm not here to ask for a consensus. I'm here to reorganize. Olivia Phillips is terminated effective immediately for cause, which nullifies her severance. And I want a full audit of every department she touched. Jeffrey stood up. He hadn't raised his voice once. He looked at the stunned board members and then at the door. I have a flight to catch. This time, I'm taking the whole plane. Jeffrey pulled a single, thin folder from Arthur's briefcase and laid it on the table directly in front of Olivia. The room was so quiet that the sound of the paper hitting the surface seemed to echo. Olivia's eyes darted down to the document. At the top, in bold black letters, were the words, Notice of Termination for Cause. You can't do this, Olivia whispered, her hands shaking so violently she had to tuck them under the table. My contract has a morality clause, yes, but it also has a $10 million buyout. If you let me go, you owe me that. It's signed by the previous board. I've read your contract, Olivia, Jeffrey said. He clicked a simple black ballpoint pen. The morality clause isn't just about criminal acts. It's about bringing the firm into public disrepute. It's about damaging the brand's core value. In 48 hours, you've managed to erase 3 years of our marketing growth. You didn't just break the spirit of the contract. You shattered the legal foundation of your employment. He didn't hesitate. He signed his name at the bottom of the page with a steady, fluid motion. He then slid the pen and the paper toward her. This signature confirms that the board, under my direction, find your conduct on Flight 71 for a direct violation of your fiduciary duties, Jeffrey continued. By signing this, you acknowledge that you're being terminated for cause. That means no buyout, no $10 million parachute, no stock vesting. You leave with what you brought in today and nothing more. I'll fight it, she snapped, a flicker of her old arrogance returning. I'll spend every penny I have to tie you up in court for a decade. With what money, Olivia? Arthur Vance intervened, his voice cool and clinical. As the majority shareholder, Jeffrey has authorized a freeze on all corporate-linked accounts pending a full forensic audit of your department. We've already found discrepancies in your travel expenses from last year. If you want to go to court, we won't just be talking about a plane seat. We'll be talking about embezzlement. The color left Olivia's face entirely. The defiance she'd been clinging to evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollowing realization. She looked around the table at her former colleagues. Robert Haley wouldn't even look at her. He was staring at the wall, already mentally drafting the press release that would sacrifice her to save the company. "You're a monster," she spat at Jeffrey. "No," Jeffrey replied, standing up and closing the folder. "I'm just a man who sat in seat 4B. You decided who I was before I even opened my mouth. You bet your entire career on the idea that I didn't matter. You lost that bet." He signaled to the two security guards waiting by the door. They stepped forward, not with the aggression of the airport police, but with a quiet, professional efficiency. "Please escort Miss Phillips in the premises," Jeffrey said. "She is not to access a computer, and she is not to take any company property. That includes a phone in her hand." Olivia stood up slowly. She looked at the termination papers. The pink slip that had just cost her a fortune and a future. She didn't shriek this time. She didn't make a scene. She walked out of the room in a stunned silence, her heels clicking on the floor in a hollow rhythm that followed her all the way to the elevator. Jeffrey watched the door close. He felt no surge of joy, only a quiet sense of closure. He looked at Robert. "Get the press release ready. Full transparency. No excuses. We start over tomorrow." 6 months after the flight that changed everything, Jeffrey Thomas stood in the lobby of the company's Chicago headquarters. The gold-plated Westbridge Group sign had been stripped from the wall, replaced by a simple brushed metal logo, the Thomas Global Group. Underneath it, in smaller letters, sat the entrance to the newly established Sarah Washington Initiative. Jeffrey looked at the portrait of his mother hanging near the entrance. She had spent her life working 3 jobs to ensure he never felt the weight of the doors being closed in his face. Now, her name was a gateway for others to walk through. The initiative wasn't just a corporate tax write-off. Jeffrey had moved 40% of the firm's annual profits into a fund dedicated to legal defense and advocacy for those targeted by systemic bias. He didn't want to just win his own battles. He wanted to tilt the scales for people who didn't have a family trust to back them up. The elevator doors opened, and Captain Fisher Garret stepped out. He wasn't in his pilot's uniform. He wore a sharp charcoal suit, though he still carried himself with the steady, observational air of a man in command of a cockpit. He walked over to Jeffrey and shook his hand firmly. "The office looks good, Jeffrey," Garret said, looking around a revamped space. "Better than the cockpit of a 777. "I hope so," Jeffrey smiled. "Are you ready to stop flying in circles and start moving the needle?" Following the incident, Garret had been offered his job back with a full apology from the airline, but he had declined. He had told Jeffrey that once you see the world from the perspective of that aisle in seat 4B, you can't go back to just keeping the peace. "I've already started the first phase," Garret said, pulling a tablet from his bag. "We've partnered with 3 major carriers to implement the Dignity in Flight protocol. It's a mandatory training and response system. No more customer is always right when the customer is a bigot. If a crew member reports a harassment incident based on profiling, the protocol is clear. The aggressor is removed, period. No debates, no vouchers." "And the justice program?" Jeffrey asked. "We have 12 cases on the docket," Garret replied. "People who were removed from flights, trains, or even hotels for no reason other than the way they looked. We're providing the legal muscle they can't afford. We're making it more expensive for companies to be silent than to be just." They walked together toward the glass-walled boardroom where the new team was waiting. It was a diverse group of lawyers, advocates, and former flight crew members. "I heard about Olivia," Garret mentioned quietly as they reached the door. "She's still trying to fight for cause termination in the lower courts," Jeffrey said, not breaking his stride. "But every time her name comes up, the video plays again. She's her own worst enemy now. She's finding out that when you build a life on looking down at people, it's a long way to fall." Jeffrey stopped at the door and looked at the captain. "You risked everything for a stranger that day, Fisher. I haven't forgotten that." "I didn't do it for a stranger," Garret said. "I did it for the rules. And the rule is that everyone gets to get home in one piece." Jeffrey nodded and pushed the door open. He sat at the head of the table, not as a silent owner, but as a leader. The air in the room didn't feel heavy or clinical anymore. It felt like progress. "All right," Jeffrey said to the room, "let's get to work. We have a lot of people to help." The man who had once been told he didn't belong in the front of the plane was now leading the way, proving that while prejudice might take the seat, character always owns the flight. In the end, Olivia Phillips tried to use her status to erase a man she didn't even know. Instead, she handed Jeffrey Thomas the keys to her kingdom. This story reminds us that while a first-class ticket might buy you a seat, it can never buy you character. Captain Garret and Jeffrey Thomas proved that the most powerful move you can make isn't grounded in wealth or title. It's grounded in the courage to stand up for what's right. What do you think? Did Olivia get exactly what she deserved, or was losing her entire career too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. If this story of justice moved you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a lesson in karma. See you in the next one.